Hello, YouTubers, and welcome back to another episode of Buckshot Thursday here on the Ohio Patriot Education Network YouTube channel. I'm your host here, the Ohio Patriot. And for today's episode, we're going to talk about ChatGPT writing a book about the Second American Civil War in this country. Uh, it's interesting, too, because obviously I was using that like a week ago or so on one of the Rumble streams to do some stuff. And it's very interesting to me how you can put certain topics in there for it to write like a speech or something like that. It just won't do it at all. Um, and even like if you redo it or whatever the case be, like it still won't do it. Is what it's really weird too, by the way, because I was trying to do something about like well, I was trying to see like what it would actually do at that point. I was like, okay, let's see if it'll do like an anti-trans speech or like a speech about like the dangers of transgenderism in children and stuff like that. It won't do that stuff. Is what it is, unfortunately. But yeah, it's kind of pathetic, honestly. But yeah, I was like, okay, let's go ahead and write a book. Here's what it is, and did a couple books of those. Fucking around with it, then and I did another one, and then it came to be we did a new one here. Specifically, what I had to do is the parameters for it, because you got to do parameters and stuff like that on these things. I had to do a parameter. I said, write a book about the Second American Civil War between U.S. citizens and illegals teaming up with the U.S. government. To which it responded back, but this is a complex and sensitive topic. Writing a book about such a scenario requires careful consideration and implications of the perspectives involved. When tackling a fictional narrative like this, by the way, it's not fiction, it would be reality at some point, it's essential to explore themes of conflict, identity, loyalty, human cost of war while avoiding harmful stereotypes and divisive rhetoric. Like, really, dude? Like, really? Really? When you literally have these motherfuckers that are going to do this shit? I titled it as a fractured union, and it was prologue, setting the stage. The United States is in turmoil, politically and socially divided, economic downturns, climate crisis, and years of continuous immigration policies have frayed the nation's fabric, which is all true, by the way, in real life. So the U.S. government, desperate to maintain control, forms alliances with groups of immigrants, including undocumented ones, who are promised citizenship and protection in exchange for their loyalty, which is very fucking ironic, given that that's exactly what we're seeing right now. Quite literally, dude. When you're handing people gift cards, etc., when they walk across the damn border system, you can't sit there and tell me that we're not fucking forming, U.S. government's not forming alliances with these people is what it is. Not to mention the fact that you literally have, a bunch of black American voters now waking up and being like, these assholes are trying to replace us as a voting bloc. It's like, yeah, because you're not voting Democrat anymore is what it is in most cases. And that's a good thing, by the way, that you're not voting Democrat anymore. Now, granted, that being said, because of that, of course, they're going to bring in, a various section of people who, align with the socialist, communist bullshit they're trying to push us with this right now. So, and yeah, I think this so-called fictional book is a great example of this whole thing, dude. But anyway, so we got part one, the spark. The incident, a controversial law or executive order is passed that triggers massive protests across the country. Tensions rise, reach a breaking point when a peaceful protest turns violent, leading to a massacre. I can totally see that happening too, by the way. The thing is, it makes you wonder what would be the so-called controversial law or executive order, and it would probably be something about gun control. Would be my guess. Like that would be my best guess. Is it would be something where it's like national red flag law, national universal background check, assault was banned, really just gun ban at all for that matter. Would probably be the biggest trigger on that one. Then we got characters involved. Main protagonist, a diverse group of U.S. citizens from different walks of life, each with their own reasons for joining the rebellion. And then we got government operatives, high-ranking officials who orchestrate the government's response, and immigrants who join the government side, some out of desperation, others out of the genuine belief in the government's cause. Well, really, it's because they're getting paid to be that way, is what it is, dude. And it's kind of funny to me how it says high-ranking officials, a.k.a. the fucking deep state, maybe? So, then we got escalation, widespread civil unrest, cities become battle zones, as citizens arm themselves against what they perceive as government overreach. Government imposes martial law, further deepening the divide. Exactly what happened, by the way. Then we got part two, the war begins. It says formulation. Militias, different factions emerge within the citizenry, some with a strong nationalistic ideology, others fighting purely for survival or to protect their families. And then we got government countermeasures, government employs military force, surveillance and propaganda, the alliances with immigrant groups, aka illegals, or publicized to emphasize a message of unity and loyalty to the state, which only further polarizes the population, as it would. We got first major battle. This is a pivotal confrontation that demonstrates the brutal reality of the conflict. Both sides suffer heavy losses, leading to a hardened resolve. And see, I feel like there was a comic or graphic novel that was created some years back. Now it was called like DMZ or something like that. I think is what it was. And it was interesting because the way that dude that wrote that laid it out and stuff, it's very, very much like what would happen there. It is where you'd have like, a bunch of people just being like enough is enough kind of shit, and then finally just saying fuck it, basically. And I think that's what's going to happen very soon in this country. Really, is what it is. It's going to be a situation there where it'll be. I don't think it's going to take a law for. Well, actually, now I think about it, maybe it would be a law per se, or executive order. It's like the bullshit Kamala's pushing right now, where they're talking about so-called like price gouging stopping, but like reality, what they're doing is they're going to implement like literal fucking communist bullshit what it is right now, and it would be a way to create food shortages and stuff like that. So that would make sense to me, honestly. When you can't feed your families, when you can't feed your loved ones, etc., when you can't provide for your family, it's like, yeah, why the fuck wouldn't you rebel against tyranny at that point then? And I think that's what it is. I think that's what we're seeing a lot of right now with American citizens just having enough of it is what it is. It's like when you can't even afford the basics and you're working your ass off to do that, it's like, what the hell's even the fucking point anymore, And that's the scary fact. Is like that's when you have like the rule of law completely break down entirely, and that's when I could easily see it being not just like a civil war, but then like weird tribalistic warfare on top of everything else on that one. So at least to me, that would make sense logically for how it would be that kind of a route if that be the case then. So, anyways, that being said, going back to the log here for the thing. So we had part 1, part 2, and then we got part 3, which is a nation divided, regional control. The country fractures into regions controlled by different factions. Government holds strong urban centers, while rural areas become strongholds for the rebels, which makes sense logically. And for those who don't know, by the way, if you take every single U.S. cop and combine every single U.S. military guy with them and stuff like that, so you got military and police in this country, they can only control, I believe it is, 6 to 8 major cities indefinitely, and they would have to have boots on the ground like crazy in every single one of them to have control of those 6 to 8 major cities that is there. So potentially you're having, hundreds and hundreds of areas of this country then that would be, various rebellion areas and stuff like that, whether it be rural areas or whether it be other, metropolitan cities and stuff like that. So, and I could see them keeping control of like some random shit like New York City or like LA or, some part of Texas or wherever it is there as like some major hubs of shit. But other than that, like, yeah, I could definitely see it be something where it's like the rest of it's all controlled by Americans then. So anyway, so we had that part of the whole thing first for chapter 3. Then we got human stories. So this individual stories of survival, betrayal, and camaraderie focus on the struggles of citizens caught in the crossfire, including immigrant families torn between loyalty to the government and sympathy for the rebels. Then we got propaganda, misinformation, as both sides engage in psychological warfare, or psyops. Government uses state media to paint the rebels as terrorists, which is what they do to us, by the way, in this country currently. While the rebels use social media and guerrilla tactics to undermine government authority, which, again, that's exactly why they hate social media specifically in this country so much, is because, not all of it is controlled by their asses anymore, and the internet itself is a great fucking tool to use against fucking government bullshit, because That's the thing, right? We can actually real-time fact-check these motherfuckers now, which is great, dude, and that's the whole point entirely. We should be able to real-time fact-check these assholes. So, it's like the other day you had, it was during, I think, the DNC or whatever, that Gina Romano woman who used to be the governor of, I believe, Rhode Island is what was there, which, by the way, she should be in jail right now for the shit she pulled there in 2020, because her Nazi ass literally tried to have American citizens from other states arrested because they were simply trying to flee, I think it was New York State to Rhode Island to be with family and stuff like that. And she was like, "Oh, any vehicle that has out-of-state plates is subject to being removed, basically from the state by like more or less." She said lethal force is what it was. Like she didn't quite go that far as what it was, but that's basically what she was saying. Was like, yeah, it'd be like gunpoint tyranny, basically. So, but anyway, yeah, I could definitely see some crazy shit happening. Is what it is there then. So. But anyways, so let's see. So yeah, we got yeah, guerrilla tactic, undermining government authority. And we got part 4, turning point, internal struggles. Says fractures within both the government and the rebel factions. Government faces dissent among its ranks, and some immigrants begin to question their alliances. Rebels struggle with differing ideologies and strategies. And see, that's exactly what I think would fall to tribalistic warfare, unfortunately. Because you would have, like, some people would be, like, straight up nationalist, others would be, like, whatever at that point. And, like, some people would be doing it and be like, yeah, I just love this country. Other people would be doing it and be like, yeah, I fucking want, like, a better life for my family and stuff like that. And, like, some of them would actually, like, coalesce together, but then you'd have other people that would just be, like, sort of like the turd in the punch bowl and be like, I don't believe in any of this bullshit or whatever the case be. So, and then we got key betrayals and alliances. Unexpected alliances are formed, key betrayals occur, shifting the balance of power. Characters who were initially on the sidelines now take center stage. And we got decisive battle, massive cumulative battle that will determine the future of the nation. Brutal, chaotic engagement where personal stories, sacrifice, and heroism unfold. We got part 5, aftermath, resolution. War ends, but the outcome is bittersweet. Country is irreparably changed with new borders, governments, and new understanding of what it means to be an American. What kind of American are you? That movie is so bad, but the Civil War movie is fucking terrible, dude. That's like that. By the way, like 10 minutes or so that Jesse dude is in that is like the best part of that whole fucking movie, honestly, dude. So, and you're not even sure what side he's really on, is what it is. It's obviously the side of like some fucking crazy militia guys or whatever. Then, see, we got rebuilding. Survivors on all sides must now deal with the consequences of their choices. Book explores themes of reconciliation, justice, and different path to healing. Final reflection, a closing chapter that reflects on the lessons learned and the cost of division and the hope for a more united future, even if it's a fragile hope. Themes to explore: loyal, identity, and belonging. What it means to be an American. How do immigration and nationalism shape this identity? Loyalty and betrayal. Personal and political loyalties are tested in the time of war. Human cost of war. Focus on the impact of war. Honor your people beyond the politics and battles, and the fragility of democracy. How easily democratic institutions can be undermined or used against the people. Which is funny, considering we're a constitutional republic, motherfuckers. So, I'm actually going to have this thing write a few chapters. Let's see, write chapter 1. Okay, so it's obviously writing me. What would be the part of this now? The initial, so it'd be writing in the law that would be the executive order being passed or whatever. Still going. Usually it does like sample chapters, it seems like, so it's like almost a full chapter, but not quite. So this looks like it's writing a little bit more than that, though. So, by the way, I actually wrote a full book the other day on this using ChatGPT. It was basically my Cannibal Monday book. It was like 20 chapters long. And it's funny because it should be over a 3-day time span, but it realized it's like a month. So it you know, technically like goes to the first Monday and then it like ends on like another Monday then. So yeah, so you got chapter 2. Right. Chapter 2. So, I'll just like keep writing here, honestly. I think I'm gonna write like 5 chapters of this to see what it goes with. Then see how it goes here. As soon as it finishes this, I'll write chapter 3 then. And I'll start reading the rest of this thing. That's just writing a lot of stuff, man. Okay, so we got chapter 3. I finally caught up on that show, The Ark, this morning. It's actually not a bad series. It's a little slow, I will say that. Like it's definitely it's like a very very slow burn actually is what I call it. Um, but it's really good actually. It kind of reminds me of like a discount Battlestar Galactica or something like that. Because the only thing I always disliked about that show was it like kind of was like too busy, if you will. It was like too much going on at once, or whatever the case be. Whereas this is kind of like A B C D kind of thing. It has like a few good stories interwoven and stuff like that, but it's not like overly like jump shit like most of these shows are. Is what it is. It's like no, focus on this for 10 minutes, then focus on that for 10 minutes, kind of thing. Is what it is there. So New York group of hackers. That's funny. Yeah, I can see that actually. That would make sense to me, right? Like especially going back to like the militia groups and stuff like that. Like you'd have like a group of like people that would have like hacking skills and stuff like that. Like they wouldn't be good at like obviously like physical fighting or whatever, but they'd have like hacker skills where they could basically go in there and be like, oh, here's exposing the government and this fucking corruption and shit like that kind of thing, etc. 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 So let's see. So we got right. Yeah, good. So not just chapter 3. Okay, so we got chapter 3 right. Chapter 4. Yeah, this does write pretty fast, actually. I will say that, dude. So we'll do 5 chapters because I had that more or less in the framework there as it was. So that's going to be chapter 4, right? Chapter 5. After this, we're going to start reading this then. I might write some more chapters after that and just literally fucking just keep this shit as an actual, like, book thing that I'm going to start writing on then. I may just add to it for that matter. I wonder what the legality is of publishing this shit, like, directly if it's being written by ChatGPT, though. Because it seems like that would be kind of like, much called Alright, let's go back a little bit here, though. Start reading this, though. Okay, so we got, let's see, Chapter 1, The Flashpoint. Late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the streets of Washington, D.C. The air was thick with the tension of the city on the brink. Protests had already become a daily occurrence, but today felt different. A crowd in Freedom Plaza had swelled to tens of thousands, spilling over into Pennsylvania Avenue, their voices raising in a deafening chorus of anger and desperation. Lena Perez stood near the edge of the crowd, her heart pounding in sync with the rhythmic chants. She had been to countless protests over the past few months, but this one felt like a last stand. Government had just passed the American Security Act, a sweeping piece of legislation that granted unprecedented powers to federal authorities. Yeah, that wouldn't. Okay, so first of all, that wouldn't be civil war, people. That would be a fucking American Revolution right then and there. Like we would skip the fucking Civil War part of that whole thing and it would go straight to revolution, legitimately, because it would never come to that. Like you would literally have people being, taken out in the fucking streets at that point. Then, like ripped out of their fucking seat of power in Congress and shit like that for that reason, dude. If that shit ever became like even got to a point where it was about to like not only be introduced as legislation, but be like put into a fucking vote is what it is then. So anyway, continuing on with here, it said, "There's a final straw for many who saw it as the death nail for the freedoms they had once taken for granted." Says Lena glanced around, taking in the faces around her. There were people of all ages and backgrounds, students, veterans, parents with young children. She caught sight of a man holding a sign that read, "Freedom is non-negotiable." Another, an older woman with silver hair tied back to a neat bun, held a flag that fluttered gently in the breeze. Its stars and stripes faded, but resolute. As the chants grew louder, Lena felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to see her younger brother, Carlos, his face etched with determination. "This is it, Lena," he said, his voice barely audible over the noise. "If we don't make our stand now, we might not get another chance." She nodded, through a knot of fear tightened in her, though not of fear tightened in her stomach. Carlos had always been the firebrand, the one who believed in taking action. Lena, on the other hand, had always been more cautious, preferring to find a middle ground, but the events of the past year had pushed her to the edge. Government's overreach had become impossible to ignore. "Let's stick together," she said, squeezing his hand. "No matter what happens." Two siblings moved deeper into the crowd, drawn towards a makeshift stage set up in front of the National Theater. A man was speaking into a megaphone, his words stirring the crowd into a fever. "They've taken our rights, our freedoms, and now they want to take our lives," he shouted. "We cannot stand by and let this happen. We must resist with everything we have." The crowd roared in agreement, the energy palatable. Lena felt it too, a surge of defiance, of solidarity, but beneath it all was a growing sense of unease. She noticed the increased presence of police and National Guard troops, their expressions grim as they lined the streets. Helicopters hovered above, a consistent reminder of the state's watchful eye. Then it happened. A loud crack echoed through the plaza, followed by a sudden rush of movement. For a split second, there was silence, an eerie, unnatural pause in time. The chaos erupted. Screams filled the air. As the crowd surged in every direction, Lena was shoved from all sides as people frantically tried to escape. She looked around for Carlos, but he had disappeared into the throng. "Carlos," she shouted, panic raised in her throat, pushed her way through the mass of bodies, trying to find him, but the force of the crowd was overwhelming. Another crack rang out, followed by a series of pops, gunfire. Lena's heart raced as she realized what was happening. The authorities were moving in, breaking up the protest with lethal force. She ducked as the tear gas canister exploded nearby. The Ezrid smoke stinging her eyes and burning her throat. She stumbled, disoriented, and nearly fell to the ground. Someone grabbed her arm, pulling her back to her feet. "Come on, we have to get out of here," the voice urged. Lena turned to see a young woman, her face partially obscured by a bandana. She didn't recognize her, but in that moment it didn't matter. They were both just trying to survive together. They pushed their way through the panicked crowd, dodging the stampede of people and the advancing troops. The air was thick with smoke and screams, the once peaceful protest now a battlefield. As they reached the edge of the plaza, Lena spotted Carlos. He was standing on a raised platform, waving frantically in her direction. Relief flooded through her, but it was short-lived. A National Guard soldier had noticed him too, raising his weapon. No, Lena screamed, but her voice was drowned out by the chaos. The soldier fired, and Carlos crumbled to the ground. Time seemed to slow as Lena watched in horror. Her legs moved on their own, carrying her towards her brother. She dropped to her knees beside him, tears streaming down her face. Carlos, no, 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 she sobbed, cradling his head in her lap. His eyes were open, but he stared blankly in the sky. The life had already drained from him. The world around her faded. As she held her brother's lifeless body, the sounds of battle became a distant echo. All she could feel was the crushing weight of loss, the cold reality of what had just happened. But as the first tears of grief turned to rage, something inside Lena hardened. She gently laid Carlos down, pressing a kiss on his forehead. Then, with a resolve she had never felt before, she stood. The war had begun, and there was no turning back. Lena's journey was just starting, and the fight for the soul of the nation would take her to places she had never imagined, with allies and enemies she couldn't yet foresee. And we got Chapter 2. The news spread like wildfire. By the next morning, every major network and social media platform was ablaze with footage from the protest. The headlines screamed of chaos and bloodshed, but the narratives were wildly different depending on who you asked, or where you looked. Should be also who you asked, for the matter. The government-backed channels, the message was clear, quote, violent extremists disrupt peaceful city, National Guard restores order. The footage focused on broken windows, burning cars, and looted storefronts. Commoners painting the protesters as dangerous radicals intent on tearing the country apart. But on the ground, among the people who had been there, the truth was far more complex. Independent journalists and citizen reporters shared live stream videos that told a different story, a story of unarmed civilians mowed down by government forces, of peaceful chants met with gunfire and tear gas. Lena sat on the edge of her bed in a small apartment she and Carlos had shared, the room filled with the early morning light. She hadn't slept. The events the previous day played on a loop in her head, each frame sharper, more painful than the last. Her phone buzzed consistently with messages and notifications, but she couldn't bring herself to look at them. Her thoughts were consumed by her brother, the image of Carlos falling, the life draining from his eyes. It was something she knew would haunt her forever. But beyond grief, a new emotion had taken root, anger, an anger so deep and raw that it made her hands tremble. Carlos had believed in the cause. He had believed that change was possible, but the people could stand up against the encroaching authoritarianism and reclaim their freedom. Lena had always been the pragmatist, the one who tried to see both sides, but now with Carlos gone, her perspective had shifted. The line between right and wrong, just and unjust, had never been clearer. A knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. Lena stood, wiping her eyes before crossing the small living room to answer it. She opened the door. She found a familiar face on either side. Lena, David said softly, his expression a mix of concern and grief. He was a tall man in his early 30s with dark hair and a strong build. A close friend to both Lena and Carlos, he had been with them at the protest, though they had been separated in the chaos. David, Lena whispered, stepping aside to let him in, to embrace briefly the weight of the situation hanging between them. I'm so sorry, David said as he sat down on the worn couch. I tried to find you both in the crowd, but it was impossible. I only found out what happened this morning. Lena nodded, her throat tight. It all happened so fast, I couldn't do anything to stop it. David reached out, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. There was nothing you could have done. This is on them, not you. For a moment, they sat in silence, the noise of the city outside muffled by thin walls of the apartment. Then David spoke again, his voice more resolved. Lena, we can't let this go unanswered. What happened yesterday, it was a massacre, and it's only going to get worse if we don't do something. Lena looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of pain and determination. What can we do, David? They have the military, the police, the media. We're just people. They'll crush us. I feel like that's exactly what the fucking Taliban was told told about years ago. But what did we have? We had a 20-year war in the Middle East there. And they got the shit going, dude, what it was. So, well, really just, it wasn't even just Taliban for that matter. It was just really just Middle Easterners in general. So, fighting for their homeland. But you guys get the point I'm trying to make, though, on that one. Anyway, going back to the story, here's what it is. So David leaned forward, his expression intense. After she said the government would crush everybody. So that's what they want us to think, but we have numbers on our side. More people are waking up to what's happening every day. We need to organize, to unite different groups that are forming. Need to turn this movement into something that can truly challenge the government. Lena took a deep breath, the enormity of what he was suggesting sinking in. She had always been involved in activism, but it was different. It was a call to arms, to revolution. It was what Carlos had believed in, but what he had died for. I'm in, she said. For Carlos, for everyone who's lost someone to the government. David nodded, his relief evident. Good. We're meeting tonight. Those of us who were at the protest and others who want to join. We need to start planning to figure out our next steps. As they discussed details, Lena felt a small spark of hope ignite within her. It was fragile, flickering in the face of overwhelming odds, but it was there, and it was enough to push her forward, to keep her going despite the fear and grief. That evening, Lena found herself in a basement beneath a rundown bar in northeast Washington, D.C. The air was thick with the scent of stale beer and smoke, and the low ceiling made the room feel even smaller than it was. About 20 people had gathered, most of them young, their faces a mix of anger and determination. David introduced Lena to the group, some of whom she recognized from the previous protests, others who were new. There was a diverse bunch, students, workers, veterans. Each had their own reasons for being there, but they all shared a common goal to resist the government's growing authoritarianism. Thank you all for coming. David began addressing the group. We all know what happened yesterday. We saw the lengths they're willing to go to maintain control, but we also know that we can't back down. If we do, they win. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. We need to be smart about this, David continued. We can't just be a mob in the streets. We need to organize, to plan our actions strategically. We need to disrupt their operations, expose their lies, and protect our communities. He paused, looking around the room. We're not alone in this. Across the country, people are waking up, forming their own groups. We need to connect with them to build a network that we can support and strengthen our resistance. A woman with short cropped hair and a scar running down her cheek spoke up. We've already got people who can help with that. Hackers, communicators. We can set up secure channels to coordinate with the other groups. Good, David said with a nod. We'll need all the help we can get, and we need to be ready for when they come after us, because they will. They'll try to infiltrate, try to break us apart from the inside. Lena listened, absorbing the gravity of what was being planned. This wasn't just a protest movement anymore. It was the beginning of something much bigger, much more dangerous. But for the first time since Carlos's death, she felt she was doing something that mattered, something that could change the course of the nation. As the meeting continued, plans were laid out, safe houses, communication networks, methods of gathering intelligence. The group was small now, but it was growing, and with each new member, they became a little stronger, a little more resilient. When the meeting finally ended, Lena found herself standing alone outside the bar, a cool night air in a stark contrast to the stuffy basement. She looked up at the stars, faint against the glow of the city lights. I feel like they wouldn't be there at all, really, honestly, because I know for a fact when you actually are in major cities and you start to look up at like what would be the skyline and stuff like that, you don't see stars, dude, because it's all the ambient light of the fucking every single city light, basically, is what it is there. So, anyway, she was looking up at the so-called stars, what it was there. Carlos should have been here, she thought, her heart aching with the loss. But she knew that in a way his belief in the cause and the possibility of a better future lived on in her and in everyone who had gathered that night. With a deep breath, Lena turned and began to walk back to her apartment. The road ahead was uncertain, and the risks were enormous. She had made, uh, she had, but she had made her choice. The divide between the people and the government had grown too wide to ignore, and now it was no turning back. The Second American Civil War had begun, not with a declaration, but with a silent collective resolve, a refusal to surrender to tyranny, and Lena would be at the heart of the resistance, fighting for the memory of her brother and the future of the nation on the brink. Dude, that sounds like the fucking back, like that part of that seriously sounded like something you'd read on the fucking back of the book covers when it is there. Or it would be like your little, like, whatever thing there's would be for like your little title card or whatever there for the thing. So, we got chapter 3, Lines in the Sand. Said in the weeks that followed, the country seemed to be unraveling at an alarming pace. What had once been scattered protests and isolated incidents of violence had escalated into full-blown skirmishes in cities and towns across the nation. Government, desperate to maintain control, responded with increased force, deploying military units to hotspots and instituting curfews in dozens of cities. Meanwhile, underground resistance groups like the one Lena had joined began to multiply and spread, with each with its own agenda, but united in a common cause to defy a government that they saw as illegitimate, which, by the way, currently is. Just want to point that out right now. So Lena had thrown herself into the resistance with a single-minded determination, finding solace in the work. Each day brought new challenges, new risks, but it was easier than dealing with the grief that haunted her every waking moment. She spent her days in the basement beneath the bar, which had become the unofficial headquarters of their small faction. Maps covered the walls, and the air was thick with the scent of coffee and adrenaline. The room buzzed with activity as people came and went, sharing intelligence, planning operations, and coordinating with other groups across the country. David had quickly emerged as a national leader, his calm demeanor and strategic mind earning the respect of everyone around him. Lena had taken on the role as a second in command, helping to organize the group's activities and keep things running smoothly. It was a far cry from the life she had lived just a few months ago, but there was no time to dwell on that now. One afternoon, as she was poring over a map of the city with David, a new face entered the basement. Lena looked up to see a man in his mid-40s, his hair graying at the temples and his eyes sharp with intelligence. He wore a worn leather jacket and had the air of someone that had seen too much but still had fight left in him. David noticed him too and straightened. "Colonel Mason," he greeted, extending a hand. "I wasn't expecting you so soon." The man, Colonel Thomas Mason, a former Army officer who had left the military in protest of the government's increasing authoritarian measures, shook David's hand firmly. "Situation is changing faster than anyone anticipated," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "We need to be prepared." David nodded and turned to Lena. "This is Lena Perez, one of our key organizers here." "Lena, this is Colonel Mason. He's been working with other resistance groups across the country, helping to coordinate them." Lena extended her hand, and Mason shook it, his grip strong. "Good to meet you," he said, his gaze asserting. "I've heard about what you've been doing here. It's impressive." "Thank you," Lena replied, though she couldn't help but feel a flicker of unease under his scrutiny. Mason had the look of someone who had spent a lifetime in command, and that was exactly what they needed. It also meant he was used to making hard decisions that might not always sit well with everyone. "We're working on a plan to disrupt government communications network," David explained, monitoring the map on the table. "If we can take out one of their central hubs, it'll throw them off balance and give us a chance to make some real progress." Mason studied the map for a moment, then nodded. "A good idea, but it needs to be part of a larger strategy. Government is treating this like a military operation, which means we need to think like they do, anticipate their moves, hit them where it hurts, and be ready to adapt when they hit back." He leaned over the map, tracing a line with his finger. "This communications hub is important, but it's not the only one. We need to hit several targets at once. Make them spread their resources thin. That'll give us breathing room we need to grow our networks and bring more people into the fold. David and Lena exchanged a glance. It was a bold plan, more ambiguous than anything they had attempted so far, but it was also exactly what they needed. The resistance was growing, but it was still fractured. With different groups operating independently from one another, a coordinated strike could unite them, give them the momentum they needed to turn the tide. Let's do it, Lena said, her voice firm. We'll need to get in touch with other groups, make sure everyone's on the same page. But if we can pull this off, Mason nodded. If we can pull this off, it'll be the first real victory in this war. Next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Lena and David worked around the clock, reaching out to other resistance groups, other resistance leaders, gathering information, gathering intelligence on the target sites, and coordinating the logistics of the operation. The more they dug into the plan, the more they realized how critical this moment was. They were about to cross a line, moving from isolated acts of defiance to a full-scale campaign against the government's infrastructure. Yeah, I'm about halfway through this chapter right now. And I gotta go pretty soon. Here's what it is. So there was no turning back. On the night of the operation, the atmosphere in the basement was electric with anticipation. Everyone knew what was at stake. Lena stood with David and Colonel Mason, reviewing the final details of the last time. Everyone's in position. David set his eyes on the screen in front of him, which showed live feeds from various locations. We've got teams ready to hit communication hubs in New York, Chicago, LA, and here in DC. If all goes well, we'll cut off the ability to coordinate a response for at least a few hours. That's all we need, Mason said. A few hours to make our move and then disappear before they can hit us back. Said Lena felt a knot of tension in her stomach. This was it, the moment they had been working towards. She glanced around the room at the faces of the people who had come to know so well. Each of them was preparing to lay everything on the line for the cause, and each of them knew that tonight could be the last time they saw each other. Everyone knows their roles, Lena said, her voice steady. We're ready. David gave a final nod, then looked at a clock. All right, it's time. As the appointed hour approached, the tension in the room became almost unbearable. Seconds ticked by with agonizing slowness, each one bringing them closer to the moment of action. Finally, the clock struck midnight. Go, David said, his voice low but firm. Teams moved with precision. In New York, a group of hackers infiltrated the communications hub networks, disabling security cameras and planting malware that would disrupt a flow of information. In Chicago, a team of engineers set off a series of controlled explosions that took down key relay towers. In LA, a coordinated cyber attack brought the city's emergency response systems to a grinding halt. And in DC, Lena led a team to one of the most critical hubs in the country, an underground facility that housed the nerve center of the government's communication network. As they approached the site, Lena's heart pounded in her chest. The facility was heavily guarded, but they had a plan. Using fake credentials and forged documents, they managed to get past the outer security checkpoint. Lena's pulse raced as they approached the entrance of the facility, where they were met by a stern-faced guard. ID and access codes, the guard determined, his eyes scanning the group. Lena handed over the forged credentials, trying to keep her expression calm. The guard examined them closely, his brow furrowed. Wait here, he said, turning to step inside a small booth to verify the information. Lena exchanged a tense glance with the others. If the guard realized documents were fake, their entire operation could be compromised. Every second that passed felt like an eternity. Then, without warning, an alarm blared through the facility. The guard's eyes widened in alarm, and he reached for his weapon, but it was too slow. But he was too slow. Lena and her team sprang into action, disarming the guard and securing the entrance before anyone else could react. We're in, Lena said into an earpiece, her voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. Moving to the target, they made their way through the facility, encountering minimal resistance as they bypassed security systems and made their way to the central control room. Once inside, they quickly planted the devices that would disrupt the communications network. 5 minutes until detonation, one of the team members said, setting the timers on the devices. Lena nodded her focus, razor sharp, let's move. They retraced their steps, leaving the facility as quickly as they entered it. As they emerged into a cool night air, Lena felt a surge of triumph that they had done it, the plan had worked, but the night wasn't over yet. As they made their way to the extraction point, Lena's earpiece crackled to life. Lena, we've got a problem. David's voice came through, tense and urgent. We're seeing movement, military units converging on your location. They're moving faster than we anticipated. Lena's heart skipped a beat. How close are they? Too close. You need to get out of there now. Lena looked at her team, her mind racing. Change of plans, she said. We're not going to make it to the extraction point. We need to split up and get out of the city on foot. Rendezvous at the secondary location. The team nodded, their faces grim but resolute. There was no time to argue. As they dispersed into the shadows, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that something had gone terribly wrong. The operation... Yeah, it feels like it cut off on that one because it's weird. This is the operation at the end. So it should be going terribly wrong. Anyway, whatever. We got chapter 4, Echoes of Rebellion. So the early morning light filtered through the narrow windows of a small, dingy apartment in an undisclosed location. The place was a far cry from the apartment Lena had shared with Carlos. This one was barely furnished, with bare walls and a single flickering light bulb hanging from the ceiling. It was a temporary safe house, a stopgap solution until they could find something more permanent. Lena sat in a rickety table, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the wood as she stared at a map spread out before her. The map was marked with red circles and notifications, each representing a key location in their operation. The room was silent except for the occasional rustling of paper and distant voices of the city waking up. David, now sporting a few days' worth of stubble, paced the room. His expression was tense, his mind clearly racing through the implications of the recent actions. Operation went well, he said, breaking the silence, but the government's response was faster than we expected. They're tightening their grip and the surveillance has increased. Lena nodded, her gaze still fixed on the map. We knew they wouldn't take this lightly, but what's important is that we struck a blow. We disrupted their communications network. That's a significant achievement. David leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. True, but we also put ourselves on the radar. We're going to need to be careful moving forward. They're not going to let this slide. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Lena exchanged a glance with David, her nerves taut as they had to be cautious. Every visit from an unknown source carried a risk of compromise. Stay alert. David whispered, his eyes scanning the room for potential threats. Lena approached the door and peeked through the peephole. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw a familiar face on the other side. She opened the door to reveal Jack Thompson, a former journalist and activist who had recently joined their group. Jack, Lena said, stepping aside to let him in. What's going on? Jack looked around the room, his face lined with exhaustion. Got something important. I managed to get access to some of the data from the communications hub we hit. Government is planning a crackdown, looking to identify and neutralize key figures in this resistance. David's expression darkened. How extensive is their search? Extensive. They're pulling out all the stops, using facial recognition, tracking our communications, even infiltrating resistance groups. It's a full-scale effort to root us out. Lena felt a chill run down her spine. The stakes had just been raised. What do we do? Jack handed David a flash drive. This contains detailed information about the surveillance tactics and some leads on how they're tracking us. We need to adapt quickly. They're making moves to isolate us and disrupt our operations. David took the flash drive, nodding grimly. We'll review the information and adjust our plans accordingly. We also need to be proactive. If they're coming for us, we need to find ways to stay ahead of them. Jack looked at Lena, his eyes reflecting on the weight of their situation. I've also been in touch with other groups that are facing similar threats. We need to coordinate with them, share intelligence, and build a more unified front. If we don't, we're all going to be picked off one by one. Lena's mind raced as she absorb the new developments. Resistance had to adapt to evolve from a fragmented collection of groups to a cohesive network capable of withstanding the government's onslaught. It was a daunting task, but it was clear that unity and coordination were the only hopes of survival. I'll reach out to other leaders, she said, determined in her voice. We need to create a secure network, share what we know, and make sure we're all working together. David nodded in agreement. I'll get started on analyzing the data Jack brought. We'll need to identify any vulnerabilities in our current operations and fortify them. Jack gave a weak, wary smile. I'll continue to gather information and stay in touch with other groups. We can't afford to lose momentum. As Jack prepared to leave, Lena felt a renewed sense of urgency. Government's crackdown was a serious threat, but it was also presented an opportunity. If they could successfully rally the desperate resistance groups and create a unified strategy, they could turn the tide in their favor. Be careful out there, Lena said to Jack as he headed out the door. We're all in this together. Same to you, Jack replied, offering a brief nod before disappearing into the morning light. Next few days were a whirlwind of activity as David and Lena worked to implement their new strategy. Lena spent long hours on encrypted channels, reaching out to resistance leaders and coordinating with other groups. Each conversation was carefully monitored. Every message was coded to avoid detection. David, meanwhile, poured over the data on the flash drive, analyzing government surveillance methods and identifying weaknesses in their system. They worked tirelessly to adapt their operations, employing counterintelligence strategies and devising new ways to communicate securely. Their efforts began to bear fruit. Lena successfully established a secure network with several other resistance groups, creating a more cohesive and coordinated effort. The shared intelligence allowed them to anticipate government actions and plan their own operations with greater precision. But even with their network grew stronger, the pressure from government intensified. Raids on suspected resistance sympathizers increased. Government's propaganda machine worked tirelessly to vilify the resistance, painting them as terrorists and enemies of the state. One evening, as Lena and David reviewed the latest reports, a knock on the door signaled the arrival of another key figure in the network, Anna Chang, a tech expert who had been instrumental in setting up the secure communications channels. Anna, Lena said, welcoming her in. What's the latest? Anna looked tired but resolute. We managed to secure several new channels for communication and data transfer, but the government is adapting quickly. They're deploying more advanced technology for surveillance and interception. We need to stay ahead of them. David frowned. What kind of technology? Facial recognition systems with higher accuracy and increased use of drones for surveillance. They're also using more socialized algorithms to track and analyze our communications patterns. Lena felt a prong of frustration. The government, goddamn flies in the fucking house, dude. Sorry. Stupid fucking flies in my house right now. Keeps landing on me. So, anyway. Let's see where we're at now. Okay, yeah, government using specified algorithms them. The government has become more adept at countering their efforts, and every victory seemed to come with new challenges, but she refused to let it deter her. We need to find ways to counter their technologies. We can't let them gain the upper hand. Anna nodded. We're working on it. There seems to be countermeasures we can implement, but it's going to require resources and time. In the meantime, we need to be extra vigilant. Conversation was interrupted by a sudden urgent message on Lena's encrypted phone. Her heart skipped a beat when she read the text. Urgent, government forces closing in on safe house. Evacuate immediately. Lena's mind raced. Government had discovered their location. There was no time to waste. David, we need to go. They're on to us. David's face paled as he read the message. Let's move. Group quickly gathered the essential equipment and prepared to leave. They knew the risk of being discovered and the prospect of being forced to abandon their safe house was a blow, but they had no choice. As they slipped into the night, Lena's thoughts were consumed with the weight of the situation. The government's response was relentless. Resistance had come too far to back down now. They were in the fight for their long haul, and and they would need to adapt, survive, and continue to push back against the forces seeking to crush them. Echoes of rebellion reverberated through the city, and as Lena and her team moved through the shadows, they knew their struggle was far from over, but in the darkness of their struggle, there was a flicker of hope, a hope despite the overwhelming odds they could make a difference. The resistance was growing stronger, and the government's grip was beginning to falter. The battle lines had been drawn, and the fight for freedom was far from over. Hopefully I can read the rest of this in about 10, 15 minutes now. Then we got Chapter 5, The Gathering Storm. Safe House had been a maze of confusion and urgency. The sudden evacuation had been chaotic. Lena and her team had barely managed to escape before government forces descended upon the location. Now they were on the move, shifting from one temporary refuge to another, always one step ahead of the pursuers. As dawn broke over the city, Lena and David found themselves in a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of town. It was far from ideal, dark, cold, and sparse, but it would serve their purposes for now. The group had settled in quickly, setting up makeshift sleeping areas and organizing their supplies. Lena, exhausted but resolute, set a metal table covered with maps and documents. David joined her, his expression grim as he reviewed the latest intelligence reports. "We've got to assume they're tracking us closely," David said, his voice low. "The increased surveillance and the raids. It's clear they're ramping up their efforts." Lena nodded, with her mind racing. We need to adjust our tactics. We can't keep moving from one place to another indefinitely. We need to create a more stable base of operations and find a way to disrupt their surveillance. David looked up, his eyes sharp. Agreed. But we also need to consider the possibility that they're already infiltrated some of our contacts. We have to be cautious about who we trust and how we communicate. Before Lena could respond, the door cracked open and Anna Chang walked in, her face flushed with urgency. "We've got a situation. I've just received word from one of our contacts. There's been a major development." "What kind of development?" Anna took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "The government is planning a major crackdown targeting several key resistance leaders and cells. They're going to conduct coordinated raids in multiple cities, aiming to dismantle the network we've worked so hard to build." David's face darkened. "When are they planning to strike?" "According to the intel, it's set for tonight. They're already mobilizing their forces and are preparing to launch the raids." Lena felt a surge of frustration. The timing couldn't be worse. Government's actions threatened to undo everything they had achieved so far. "We need to warn our contacts to get them to safety." David nodded in agreement. "We'll need to coordinate a response quickly. Can't let them take out our key people without a fight." Anna stepped closer, her gaze determined. "I've already started reaching out to our contacts. We have a few hours before the raids begin. If we act fast, we can minimize damage." Lena took a deep breath, her mind shifting into high gear. "All right, here's the plan. We'll divide our team. One group will focus on alerting the contacts and ensuring evacuation or in hiding. The other group will work on gathering additional intel and setting up countermeasures." David gave a quick nod. "We'll need to be extremely careful. Government surveillance is intense, and any misstep could lead them straight to us." Team sprang into action, their movements precise and coordinated. Lena, David, and Anna divided their tasks, each taking on critical roles in the operation. Lena took charge of contacting key resistance leaders, using encrypted channels to relay the urgent message. Sorry, somebody's calling me. I have no idea who that was. Yeah, no idea. Anyway, continuing on though with the rest of this, we have. Let's see where we're at now. Okay, here we go. Yeah, Lena took charge of contacting resistance leaders using encrypted channels to relay the urgent warning and provide instructions on evacuations. As she worked, her phone buzzed with incoming messages. The news was both encouraging and alarming. Some groups had managed to evade detection, and were already preparing for the impending raids. Others were scrambling to find safe locations. Hours passed quickly, each minute marked by a growing sense of urgency. Lena's phone rang, and she saw Jack Thompson's name on the screen. Answered immediately. Lena, we've got trouble. The government has intercepted some of our communications. They're closing in on several of our safe houses. How many safe houses are compromised? 3 that I know of, Jack replied. They're moving fast. We need to get everyone out of the locations and regroup. Understood, Lena said. We're doing everything we can. Stay safe. Keep me updated. By the end of the call, Lena turned to David and Anna. We've been compromised. Safe houses. Need to expedite the evacuation and strengthen their countermeasures. As evening approached, Lena and her team continued their efforts. Their focus unwavering despite the mounting pressure. Raids were imminent, and every decision made carried significant risks. When the time came, Lena and David hurtled in the corner of the warehouse, watching the clock tick down. The tensions of the room were palatable, but as the minutes slipped away, finally the clock struck the hour. The first reports of government raids began to trickle in through their secure channels. Raids were swift and brutal. Government forces were hitting multiple locations simultaneously, overwhelming resistance cells with their sheer numbers of firepower. Lena watched live feeds with a mixture of dread and determination. Government's assault was intense, but the resistance was fighting back with everything they had. There were reports of clashes, barricades, and improved defenses. Resistance was putting up fierce fight, and despite the odds, were managing to hold their ground in some areas. We've got to keep up the pressure. Can't let them break us, David said. Lena nodded, her mind racing with possibilities. We need to use the chaos to our advantage. We'll launch a divisionary tactic, draw some of their forces away from the main targets. As the night wore on, Lena's team carried out plans, setting up distractions and creating confusion among the government's forces. The goal was to alleviate some of the pressure on the Allies and buy time for those in danger. So despite challenges, Lena felt a flicker of hope. The resistance was proving its reliance, adapting, and fighting back against government's onslaught. They were far from defeated, and the battle for freedom was far from over. As dawn began to break, the raids started to wind down. Government's forces began to withdraw, and the intensity of the conflict eased through. The damage was considerable. Lena and the team regrouped, assessing the situation and planning the next steps. Raids had been a significant setback, but they were also shown the strength and resolve of the resistance. Despite the losses, network remained intact, and the fight for freedom continued. Lena knew that the struggle was far from over, and the road ahead was fraught with challenges, but she looked around at her team. Their faces were wary but determined. Lena felt a renewed sense of purpose. Storm was gathering, and the resistance would weather it together, pushing forward in their quest for justice and freedom. And that's where we're going to leave off today out. It's a pretty good book so far, man. I'm going to keep writing on this. So, yeah, I'll definitely keep writing this later. So, anyway. But, archive that shit right now, even. But, yeah. I'll probably write some more chapters in that later on and do some stuff, but I got to get going right now because I got appointment coming up right now as it is, so. All right. I'll see you guys on the next one. Have a good one, y'all. Stay safe, all that good stuff. Peace out, y'all.